The Buccaneers rookie receiver is stepping up at the right time. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @JYarcho_Bucs, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. No ads or hashtags or anything like that. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Should Todd Bowles be recognized for what this team is doing? And we're taking a look at the Bucs' future coming up in a little bit. But let's start with something that I promised I would dive into, and that is the recent emergence of Jalen McMillan in this offense. Now, I had this show recorded and everything. My computer has crashed twice in the last 24 hours, so I apologize for this episode being a little late, but I wanted to make sure that I brought you all of my thoughts on Jalen McMillan. So you take a look at what McMillan has done so far, and it's been largely a disappointment for much of the season. He started off the year with one catch on 3 targets for 32 yards and a touchdown against Washington. After that, he had 9 receptions on 19 targets for just 77 yards, had some bad drops. One in particular, you remember, resulted in an interception against the New Orleans Saints. He's missed 4 games due to injury. You can jump over to Pro Football Focus, take a look at some of their metrics, and he was real bad before the bye. 2 games graded below a 50. All but one of his games were graded under a 60. Since the bye, he's been getting better. Grades go from 52.6 to 58 to 62.7, and then 70.3 was his grade against the Los Angeles Chargers last week. Over the last 4 games, 10 receptions on 18 targets for 170 yards and 3 touchdowns. 37 of his 156 snaps have come in the slot, where he's starting to be utilized more over the last 3 weeks, and it is paying off. It's creating mismatches. It's creating opportunities for him to get open. But think about this. 136 of his 279 yards this season have come in the last 2 games. 3 of his 4 touchdowns have come in the last 2 games. 7 of his 12 receptions since the Bucs came out of the bye week have resulted in a first down. This is the kind of play that we have needed to see out of J-Mac. There was a lot of hype around him leading up to the season. There was a lot of excitement around him. I personally predicted him to be the rookie with the biggest impact on the team outside of Graham Barton this season because of what he was supposed to do for the offense. Instead, that's been Bucky Irving. But J-Mac has not gotten the kind of looks that I expected him to get, and some of that has to do with injuries to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. That caused a change in the offense. Some of it has to do with his own injuries that he's had to deal with. That took him out of the lineup. There's nothing he can do about that. But I also think that some of it has to do with the chemistry and trust that's needed to be built between McMillan and Baker Mayfield. They just haven't had it. They have not had that chemistry. They have not had that connection through much of the season. As we get later into the season, as they continue to work with each other more, we're starting to see that come to fruition. There were moments early on in the season where Baker would look to McMillan in key moments, and McMillan didn't come through. Then you had games against the Ravens and Falcons where there wasn't much choice but to feed McMillan the ball because of injuries to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. But then he misses the next 3 weeks with injury. So you kind of lose that connection that you started to build. It's been a roller coaster kind of season for the rookie out of Washington. All of that said, now things are starting to click. They're starting to gel a little bit. He's establishing himself as a third down threat, a deep threat, a red zone threat, and Baker is starting to look his way just a little bit more. That is huge for the offense heading into this final stretch and leading into the playoffs. Not having Chris Godwin is absolutely brutal, and there has not been a guy to step up outside of Cade Otton as a consistent threat to complement Mike Evans. You have the running game that has been absolutely great. Bucky is now just under 150 yards away from a 1,000-yard rushing season, but Baker hasn't had the guy that he can go to on a regular basis outside of Mike Evans and Cade Otton. Sterling Shepard has had his moments, but he isn't consistent. Not only that, he's also had some pretty bad penalties where he's kind of lost his head a little bit and he's hurt the team. Trey Palmer, he's hot and cold. He's going to get only 2 or 3 targets a game, might come down with a catch. He's not a consistent, reliable threat. Ryan Miller, a few decent catches, but he isn't polished enough to really be a problem for opposing defenses. Now there's a guy that's growing week by week that Mayfield knows that he can trust no matter the situation, because he's proven over the last couple of weeks that he can make plays happen. And that's, of course, Jalen McMillan. It's also building the confidence of McMillan to win his routes and win those reps. I did something the other day. I sat down, I watched Jalen McMillan against the Lions, then against the Saints, and then this last game against the Chargers. Just watched his reps. And I started to watch how he was attacking each play. You can tell a huge difference in him from week 2 to week 6 to last week. He's a player that has a full grasp on not only what he's supposed to do, but he appears ready to win every snap. You could tell a little hesitation early on, a little uncertainty, a lack of confidence, and those routes were not as crisp. He was not as quick coming out of his breaks. Now, when he lines up and attacks, he knows that he's going to get open. He's going to beat the guy across from him. There's a lot more confidence in his steps, and you can see it. You can see the stark difference. That is huge for what Liam Coen wants to accomplish on the offensive side of the ball to continue to build off of a phenomenal season that the Bucs have already had. McMillan is going to be needed against the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday night. He has a chance to improve on his 2-reception performance against the Panthers a few weeks ago, and then has a chance to really improve on his worst game of the season, which was against the New Orleans Saints, and help propel the Bucs into the postseason. Sometimes it takes a rookie a little while to really get their legs under him in the NFL. The learning curve can be extremely steep. We saw it with Zion McCollum, who was one of the better corners in the NFL this season, but it took him, this is his 3rd year. It took him a couple years to get there. We've seen it with Cody Mauch. He's taken a huge jump from last year in his rookie season to this year. We saw it with Luke Gedeke. Huge struggles early on in his career. Now back-to-back seasons, he's been absolutely phenomenal at right tackle. For McMillan, he's getting hot at the right time, and continuing to build on this means that his future appears to be pretty bright in Tampa Bay. So how could McMillan's rise affect the team in the near future beyond playing games? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. The Buccaneers are 3.5-point road favorites against the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday night with an over-under of 48.5, and the Bucs are also minus 390 to win the NFC South, while the Falcons have dropped all the way to plus 320. What a change from just a month ago. Visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a minute of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. The new Locked On NFL is here, and it's 2 shows every day. You got the madman Tyler Rowland kicking off your morning. Then you can swing by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts. You get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. So make it your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I had someone reach out and ask me, with the recent emergence of Jalen McMillan, should the Buccaneers put their resources elsewhere like edge rusher and let Chris Godwin walk? So here's the thing. I actually talked about this or something similar to it on the Our Lads podcast last week. McMillan is not a swap for Godwin. This is not an even exchange. McMillan, while he has taken snaps out of the slot, is not a slot receiver. He is not the kind of guy that can replace the role that Godwin plays in the offense. Godwin was the NFL's best receiver this season when he went down with his dislocated ankle. He had the most yards after catch, the most receptions. He was tied for the most touchdowns. He had the most first downs. He had the highest catch percentage. He was an absolute machine. All due respect to the receivers on the Bucs roster, and this includes Mike Evans, none of those receivers are as sure-handed as Chris Godwin is. If I'm the Bucs, I am doing everything in my power to ensure that Chris Godwin remains on this roster next season and beyond. Franchise tag him if you have to. Work out a long-term deal before the July deadline, just like you did with Antoine Winfield Jr. last year. But there isn't a receiver in free agency or the draft that can do what Godwin does in this offense, at least not immediately, not in the 2025 season. Maybe there's a player you can draft and develop, but he won't be what Godwin was pre-injury for this football team. Now, I should say the caveat to all of this is whether or not Liam Coen returns. If Coen isn't on the staff and the Bucs are running a different offense next season, things can change. Of course, any offensive coordinator is going to want a player like Chris Godwin on their team, but they may be able to live without it. In Cohen's offense, Godwin could wind up being the NFL's leading receiver at the end of the 2025 season, whether that's leading in yards, leading in receptions, leading in first downs, leading in yards after catch, leading in touchdowns, or a combination of all of those. Chris Godwin is tailor-made for Liam Coen's offense. You take a look at the edge rushers and the linebackers and the corners that are set to become free agents. Khalil Mack, Hassan Reddick, Matt Judon, Josh Sweat, Jerome Baker, Bobby Wagner, Denzel Perryman, Isaiah Simmons, Eric Kendricks, DJ Reed, Jeff Okudah, Eric Stokes, Ifeatu Melifonwu. The Bucs can find answers at some of those holes in free agency. And I'm not going to go through all of the draft prospects, but even making the playoffs and drafting a little bit later than had they missed the playoffs, you're going to get a plug-and-play defensive player wherever you're drafting. I've talked about Benjamin Morrison, the corner from Notre Dame, who had surgery in October. He is at the top of my list of players that I would love to see be drafted by the Buccaneers. He is a plug and play shutdown corner. I still think the Bucs move on from Jamel Dean after the season. They have an out built into that contract. Jamel Dean has not lived up to the contract. They're going to look for someone to be on the opposite side of Zion McCollum. Benjamin Morrison would be a phenomenal addition. And as I just mentioned, he had surgery in October. He was probably going to go in the top 12 and be the second, maybe third corner off the board. The Bucs are now likely to be able to snag him in the early to mid 20s because of that injury, especially if he is not recovered enough to participate in Notre Dame's pro day or in the scouting combine. Then you got Michael Williams, the edge from Georgia. He's a plug and play guy. Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, plug and play guy. Trey Amos is a corner from Ole Miss that'll be there in the 20s. Jahad Campbell from Alabama might be the best linebacker in the class, and he's going to be there in the 20s. He might even slip into the second round. It depends on what teams are going to value linebacker, especially an off-ball linebacker, ahead of positions like wide receiver, edge rusher, corner, safety, wide receiver, quarterback, obviously. So there's a lot of options in there in the draft where Jason Light and his team have done some absolutely incredible work. They have found starters across all the rounds of the draft. You look at Bucky Irving, 4th round pick, and he's one of the best running backs in the NFL. He is the best rookie running back in the NFL. You look at Tyke Smith and Jalen McMillan. Those were both 3rd rounders. You take a look at what they've done in undrafted free agency. The Bucs can find starters all over the place. And I think in the end, the impact that Godwin has on the team and on the offense is too valuable to let him walk just because of a couple of games from Jalen McMillan. I think McMillan is going to be much better next year than he was this year. As I talked about at the top of the show, I've seen the growth from different parts of the season and the confidence that he has in himself now going out there for every route. But he isn't the guy that can replace Godwin's role. He has his own role that he needs to fill. So bringing Godwin back, bringing Levante back, probably Ben Bredesen after the season that he's had, I would think that they're going to be interested in trying to bring back Mike Edwards. All of that is vital to the success of this team. Then you add in a few other outside signings to try and build out the roster, then attack the draft the way that you did last year and the year before and the year before, with starting caliber impact players in the first 4 rounds. Don't forget, you'll have a lot of guys coming back from injury too. For all we know, the Bucs may have Servassier Dennis penciled in as the other starting inside linebacker for next season. So that way they can address other spots on their roster, fill more depth at other shallow positions. We've seen secondary just be bludgeoned to death all season long because of injury. But a long answer to a short question is simply no. I don't think that they are in a spot where they should just allow Chris Godwin to walk and spend the money elsewhere. You are not going to find another receiver or another player like him. And you want, if you're going to be a Super Bowl contender, if you're going to grow from this season and continue to make noise in the NFC and put yourself in that championship caliber conversation, you need Chris Godwin on the field, for Baker Mayfield, along with Mike Evans playing in that Liam Coen offense. Talking about Todd Bowles' impact, that is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. It's the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineups stay in play even if one of your players leaves in the first half and doesn't return. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quickly as 15 minutes. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, all lowercase, all one word, and you're going to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That has definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize that I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together all in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, the best feature is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services that I wasn't using anymore. There were subscriptions that I had that I was paying for twice, or that I was paying for and my wife was paying for, and it saved us a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for not just my future, but also our family vacation next year. So there's no more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked on. rocketmoney.com/locked on. Wrapping things up here on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and I've been very critical of Todd Bowles this season. A lot of Bucs fans want him fired in favor of Liam Coen. A lot of people believe that Todd's style and scheme is reaching an outdated status, and that it's been a big reason for the struggles this season because offensive coordinators have been able to pick up on tendencies, been able to pick up on shortcomings in Todd's defense. But the Buccaneers have now won 4 straight games, and they are in the driver's seat for the NFC South and to win it for the 4th straight season. Todd Bowles would be the first coach in franchise history to win the division 3 years in a row. Bruce Arians didn't do it. Tony Dungy didn't do it. John Gruden didn't do it. It would just be Todd Bowles. One could argue that a weak NFC South in 2022 and 2023 helped, but it's still something that Todd Bowles should be proud of accomplishing. Because, let's face it, the Bucs have been in weak divisions before and still gotten their clocks cleaned and missed the playoffs and had a top 10 pick in the draft. So, someone asked me whether or not Todd Bowles, instead of getting fired in favor of Liam Coen, should actually be in consideration for Coach of the Year, considering all of the injuries that not only his side of the ball has faced this season, but also the injuries as a whole for the entire roster, and the fact that he still has them in a position to win the South and be a 3 seed in the playoffs. My answer is no. I don't think Todd Bowles should be in consideration for Coach of the Year. Ultimately, I think it boils down to how bad the defense has been over the course of the season. These are all-time bad marks for Todd Bowles. 27th in total defense, 30th in passing defense, 11th in rushing defense. That's an improvement over the course of the year because the Bucs were way down there earlier this season. Then 19th in scoring defense. They're just ahead of the New York Giants in points per game allowed. These are brutal numbers for Todd Bowles. And trust me, I understand that injuries are a big part of it. Just a friendly reminder, might make you cringe. Here's your trigger warning for the episode. The players on injured reserve for the Buccaneers: Jordan Whitehead, Troy Hill, Bryce Hall, Chase Edmonds, Chris Godwin, Cam Johnson, Servassier Dennis, Marquise Watts, Sua Opeta. Other players that are out with injury or have missed time with injury this season. Bucky Irving, Mike Evans, Jalen McMillan, Mike Edwards, Antoine Winfield Jr., KJ Britt, JJ Russell, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Luke Gedeke, Tristan Wirfs, Christian Izzian, Zion McCollum, Jamel Dean, Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey, Greg Gaines. I am sure that I have missed some because the Bucs injury report is at minimum 15 players every single week. But this list is insane. And yet the Bucs are still 8-6, still on pace to win the South. And yes, Todd deserves probably more credit than we're either willing to admit or willing to give because of the struggles that we've seen this year, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But on the flip side, think of where they would be if the defense wasn't struggling the way that it is. Just an average defense. Think of where this Buccaneers team could be. While injuries play a role in all of this, Todd Bowles has needed to adapt to what he had. And it seems like he hasn't really done that until the last couple of weeks. The KJ Britt experiment at starting inside linebacker has been a failure. The edge rush has not been good at all. Yaya Diaby was the hypiest hype train of all time, and that has not come anywhere close to fruition. That's on the coaches to not develop players like Diaby, players like Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. These guys that were supposed to be major contributors to the defense, they're still stuck where they were their rookie year. If the Bucs had just an average defense to complement arguably the most explosive offense that they've ever had, they're probably sitting at 10 or 11 wins right now. We can give Todd his flowers. We can applaud him for having his team in the hunt for the postseason with all the adversity that they have faced. But to talk about him as a coach of the year, I think is too much. And honestly, I think it's slightly, for lack of a better term, I think it's slightly disrespectful to guys like Dan Campbell, Kevin O'Connell, Sean Payton, Dan Quinn, Mike Tomlin. I mean, outside of Dan Campbell, those coaches that I just named belong to a team that you expected absolutely nothing from this year. The Vikings were supposed to be rebuilding with Sam Darnold, and instead they're one of the best teams in the league. Sean Payton in Denver, it was supposed to be a rebuilding process, yet Bo Nix has come on as one of the best rookies out there. He and Jaden Daniels are in a two-man race for Offensive Rookie of the Year. Speaking of Jaden Daniels, you got Dan Quinn in Washington, and he had something like 30-plus new players added to the roster this season. They've been absolutely outstanding. Mike Tomlin taking in two rejected quarterbacks and then dominating with both of them in line to contend to win the AFC North. I think those kinds of coaches deserve to be rewarded far more than a team that was supposed to take a big step forward, and is instead they're essentially replaying last season. And the brightest spot on the team is the side of the ball that the head coach isn't in charge of. So while I do understand people still wanting to move on from Todd and go to Liam, and I do understand that Todd deserves some credit for what the Buccaneers have been able to do in this 4-game win streak to get back to where they are, I don't think that Todd is anywhere close to the arena of being considered coach of the year, even in spite of all of the adversity. That is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Please check out everything going on over at Twitter, at Locked On Bucs, at @Yarcho_Bucs. Make sure you're coming back tomorrow. I will be doing the crossover with Locked On Cowboys host Marcus Mosher. Should be an interesting episode. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. And of course, make sure you are subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as your favorite podcast platform. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.